Hey everyone, Allie here from Allie Olson Sewing Patterns. Today, I'm going to show you how to sew knit bands onto the Kila Tank instead of bindings. I'm showing this method on a serger, but you could also use your sewing machine with a stretch stitch. First, you'll want to cut out the pattern as instructed. So you'll have the back bodice and the front bodice, both of those are cut on the fold. And you'll also have 2 armhole bindings and 1 neckline binding. These pieces do not need to be modified for this tutorial. First, pin the shoulder and side seams of the Kila Tank. And sew those seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then fold the bindings in half, matching the short ends of the bindings with right sides together. And sew those with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then you'll want to fold the bindings in half so that the long raw edges are aligned with wrong sides together, and we're going to sew those together. Now, I do the folding and the sewing at the same time, but you can fold the binding first and press them if that's easier. So we're sewing these together because the edges of knit fabrics will often roll when stretched, and we want to avoid that. Okay, so we're going to divide the bands into 4 quarters. First, I'll fold the band in half on the seam to mark the center front point with a pin. Then I'll match the center front point and the seam to find the halfway points and mark those with a pin. Repeat these steps for the other bindings. And then we'll do the same thing on the neckline and the armholes. I'll find the center back and the center front points by matching the shoulder seams, and I'll just put a pin in those spots. Then I match the center front and the center back pins and find the halfway point between those, and I place a pin there. Now do the same thing on the armholes. Fold the armhole in half on the underarm seam and place a pin, and then match those pins and fold in half again to divide the armhole into 4 quarters. Then I'll pin the band to the neckline, matching the center front and back points and the halfway points. Now pin evenly between the 4 quarters. You'll need to stretch the band so that it lays flat against the neckline and the armholes. And then starting at the center back, we'll sew the binding to the neckline. You'll be stretching the band onto the neckline as you sew. Here I'm sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And after you've sewn the bands onto the neckline and the armholes, you want to press them really well. The seam allowance should be pressed away from the bands. And finally, I like to sew a zigzag stitch underneath the seam to keep the seam allowance tacked down. You'll start this at the center back and carefully sew all the way around the neckline and armholes. That's it. Give your Kila Tank a good press and admire your handiwork. For more tutorials like this and our range of simple silhouettes for the home sewist, check out AllieOlsen.com.